Hey, folks, welcome to this webinar from Nile, where we're going to be talking about how to get higher education campuses future ready with network as a service or NaaS. And why is this important for us to discuss today? We're seeing a lot of these higher educational institutions experience budget cuts or at the most flat budgets. They're resource constrained, especially with lean IT, and there's a proliferance of security threats. And amidst all of this, educational institutions need to continue to educate students. And we're hoping this webinar will give you some insights into how can the IT team help drive campus-wide productivity, security, and a better experience for their students and citizens, taking advantage of some of these innovations. Joining me in this webinar is my friend and colleague, Andrew Froelich. Andrew is an expert in the industry um, with a variety of background and in operations and in terms of hands-on deployment, consultative engagements in this space. And I'm Shashi. I head up the go-to-market efforts for Nile, and I'm pleased to partner with Andrew as we discuss some of the items in this agenda. We'll take a look at the challenges. We'll talk about what's the status quo like in this industry, and how do you rethink the status quo for the here and now, the era of AI, if you will. And then how can the next generation enterprise grade network as a service offering, how can it help with rethinking this and in solving the challenges? And we'll take a look at a few use cases that come to bear, and maybe we'll have an interactive Q&A with some of the questions that you all may have. So with that, let's jump right in. We have a bit of a housekeeping in case any of you have questions or comments. You can just hit the Q&A button and ask the question there, and we'll be happy to answer that for you during the course of this session, or with some of our experts standing by. All right, so let's get to what the topic of today's conversation is, and we'll treat this as an interactive discussion between Andrew and I. What we're seeing across the industry, particularly in the United States, where there is an emphasis on higher education, this is kind of the new normal. On one hand, we have the IT organizations really being asked to drive up productivity, drive up the experience for students and their employees. But on the other hand, they're also being asked to rationalize and cut down on their budget. Cost reduction is a big ticket item, and this seems to be the case in over 50% of the cases. Certainly, from our experience, it's closer to 70, 75-ish, but more than half the higher ed universities are going through this in real time. And as they go through it, it's a bit of a paradox because you're asked to boost experience and productivity, but you're being challenged to do so with fewer resources and a lower budget. And for many, connectivity is the lifeblood of the organization. My daughter is in a higher educational institution, and it's so important for them to be connected no matter where they are, whether they're in the dorm or in the library or roaming somewhere in between, as students do. And they really cite not having access to high performant Wi-Fi, as an example, as being a stress inducer for them. And how do you kind of make sure that this connectivity is seamless? Whereas on the other hand, we see that when CIOs in higher educational institutions are polled, Gartner did a survey very recently, and they came back and said the number one function that's impacted as part of budget reductions is corporate IT. And so if you can't really go down this path of building something that's high performant, then it's also challenging to, many organizations feel challenged to go do upgrades. And if they aren't upgrading, then obviously a lot of the new bandwidth consuming apps, many of which are now proliferated with AI, it becomes a challenge to run them on the local connectivity. And we also have a lot of devices. Don't forget, it's not just the users, but a lot of the OT devices or IoT devices, many of which aren't necessarily built with security in mind. And it's not just the connectivity, but it's secure connectivity. So it's this is the problem statement, and it seems to be quite the normal situation today, except it is not. So when you look at how do we start to resolve this, or is there a elegant pathway to resolve this, it's very important for us to understand, what's the status quo. And the status quo, unfortunately, is in the context of university environments, they've been built up over a period of time. Anytime you get a budget, you kind of bring in a new piece of IT, and over time, it starts to build out in a ad hoc way sometimes. So you have different switches, you have different wireless devices. They're not unified from a controller perspective. You have different protocols which have lasted all the way from the late 80s and the 90s even. And when you want to bring in security, it's never designed in, it's bolted on. And then we talked about the notion of OT devices, which have come about in the last decade and a half. And so all of these create a spaghetti solution with bolted on, stacked, different management constructs. It's a series of point solutions which are stitched together with Band-Aid. And when you look at how to manage this, how do you secure this, you run into a lot of issues. You have patching and upgrades for each one of them. License management itself is a big deal. And then you look at enforcing policy, which again is inconsistent and on a device by device basis. So it becomes very hard to think about what the security posture is and how do you drive compliance. Sometimes universities end up outsourcing this to a managed service provider, and it might be the best managed service provider, but they are looking at managing this spaghetti solutions which is built up over a period of time, and they don't own the technology. So it becomes a bit of a black hole when something goes wrong, and there is this wall of frustration that crops up with the ticket resolution times taking much longer. So there's a fair amount of complexity in operations, and most universities we speak to realize that, and they say, look, for every $1 that we spend on procuring technology, we spend anywhere between $4 to $10 in terms of managing it across its operational life cycle. So it's a non-trivial problem. And now when you start to augment these with the fact that you really don't have the IT resources to manage them, certainly not with the scale of things that are coming their way. And budget is a bit of an issue where previously you could plan for a capex cycle and do a refresh, but now those huge spikes of funding aren't necessarily there. So, and then AI is sort of both you know a blessing as well as a bane. It's a threat, and they have to deal with a lot of these things with constrained IT organization, constrained budget, and these ballooning operational costs with not a lot of training and skill set that's coming in with the new wave. So in our parlance, when we look at this landscape, to solve this problem, we cannot do so by adding one more box or bringing one more protocol or one more piece of policy spaghetti. We view that this chain is only as strong as the weakest link, and the more fragile links you introduce, the chain actually becomes weaker instead of being stronger. And so now looking at the LAN architecture to make it much more agile, make it simpler, make it more secure, it has to have a fundamental rethink. And so that's sort of the premises that we've sort of arrived on. And what we want to get into is how do you take this kind of status quo that's prevalent with an architecture that's outlasted its longevity from the 1990s, and how do you modernize it? How do you make it akin to what we have seen in the data center and cloud, where a lot more transformative architectural evolutions have happened? So, in some ways, and I think here is where we will start to kind of discuss, because reimagining the status quo is very important. So, first is how do you get rid of that spaghetti stacked Lego block solutions with missing pieces or duplicative pieces, and unify that into a much more elegant architecture. And when you do that, you don't treat security as bolted on. You bake it into a fabric, which is a network and security fabric with a high degree of standardization, where security and is built in natively, and it's of a deterministic nature. We talked about the experiences that universities are expected to deliver to their citizens and students. And how do you make this deterministic? How do you account for the fact that you want wired and wireless convergence there, and likewise for IoT, OT, and for network and security? Because we view these as two sides of the same coin. Connectivity cannot be insecure. By default, it has to be secure connectivity. So this unification of the architecture is a very big deal. So you get rid of the complex point solutions. The second piece is, how do you simplify that operations? And in doing so, how do we take advantage of AI, not just as a point use case solution, but something that you can apply across the entirety of the life cycle? Just as we can standardize the technology components, can you standardize the operations piece as well? Because that's where the complexity really resides. And when you standardize it, can you start and apply AI and this degree of standardization from the planning and design stage in day zero to when you deploy in day one? And then can you continue that across the day through to day end in a way that the entire network security elements become autonomous? We see that in the consumer world, but when it comes to the network and the business side, it's a lot more challenging. And a lot of it has to do with making that operational shift happen to make it truly autonomous. And we can do so, can we do so taking advantage of AI? And the third is, really addressing and hitting the nail on the head for organizations that are resource constrained, where their IT staff is experiencing burnout, where they're being challenged to do more with less. Instead of tacking more sites, more buildings, more protocols at them, how can we take advantage of an as a service delivery mechanism, which again is powered by AI, takes advantage of cloud services catalog, but with the promise to deliver an end-to-end SLA, and all of this in the construct of an OpEx subscription model, where they don't need to go really solicit funding for that huge CapEx spike. They can operationally enter into this model, which is a lot more conducive for them with the subscription, all of these being kind of bundled in. So that's a clean slate approach in many ways. We have seen that in the data center and cloud with the SaaS transformation. We have seen that in the WAN, for example, with SASE coming in, and zero trust being really prevalent across both the data center cloud as well as the WAN. So why should the LAN be left behind? Why should it be a second class citizen in terms of really taking advantage of some of these benefits? And why should higher ed institutions, which are pioneering a lot of research, really have to deal with this kind of 1990s infrastructure, which holds them back, holds their students back? Is there a better way? So that's really the problem statement that we're trying to solve. And I'd like to kind of invite Andrew into the conversation and see, how do we start to take these foundational pillars, if you will, of a zero trust fabric, of AI powered operations applied across the life cycle, and a true as a service delivery mechanism with the services cloud and this subscription servings, um, into something that's more meaningful for them to consume today. So, Andrew, any thoughts from you in terms of how we are packaging some of these things?
Yeah, Shashi, it's thank you by the way. It's interesting to see and listen to how you kind of set this up with beginning with the status quo and then moving into how is Nile doing things differently. And what popped into my head was over the last couple of weeks, my family and I have been doing some spring cleaning in the house, despite it being fall. We're doing some spring cleaning because, after you live in your house for a number of years, you start to accumulate things that you
Clutter.
think you might need, right? And you're trying to you're trying to find things and you can't find them because there's just too much stuff. There's too much clutter. That's what I think of when I think of a traditional network, right? And so you've got all these, specialized appliances to manage your IoT and your OT infrastructure. You've got network access control appliances that help you to protect the network and provide the proper authentication. And all of these add on tools for monitoring things like that. And they might work on day one when you first move into your house, per se, right? Everything might fit correctly. But as the time goes on, these things start to add clutter. They add um, you know uh, connectivity problems. They add security problems, gaps in your security, and that's when you need to do a spring cleaning. So you could either gut everything, which takes a huge amount of time to go in and clean everything out and try and put everything back and organize it, or you could move. You could move your house, right? And that's essentially what we're doing in a way with Nile is we're saying, you know, we've got such a better way of approaching this solution that you're going to want to abandon what you've got now because it's just too much. It's too much to handle, especially with lean IT teams. And when you focus on creating these lean IT teams that can't do these day-to-day mundane tasks, um, that's when you need to start looking at a solution like Nile.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of kind of framing it because clutter is akin to complexity, and it's amazing how in many of these organizations that we have talked to, Andrew, they've had the policies being defined by somebody who's no longer with the organization, and
Absolutely.
they just don't want to touch it because they don't know what will break. So it's a series of these, that's why I kind of call it spaghetti, because there are a number of these things that are stacked, and it's a hard problem for them to transform themselves unless they can declutter themselves and unwind that spaghetti.
Absolutely. And when you're talking about higher education, the biggest problem for higher education is um, they rely on the Wi-Fi network so much more than most other organizations because students are moving between classes. Your faculty is moving around campus, and there's lots of branch office opportunities. And I actually worked in two different university environments as a network engineer and architect in the past. So I understand the pain that a lot of these IT teams go through, especially when it comes to chasing down Wi Fi problems, right? So we'll get ticket after ticket of people saying, "Hey, there's a Wi-Fi in this location that there's a problem." Well, you go there and you show up, you do some testing, everything looks okay. So it's we call it chasing ghosts, right? So it's like the ghost is moving around, the problem's moving around your campus environment, and you can't find it. And that's what these university and college IT teams have to deal with.
For sure. So we kind of talked about these three pillars, if you will, in terms of how the new architecture isn't treating them as silos, but the power is in terms of how they're all being brought together in a converged way, with everything being built off a zero trust fabric. You have services that are getting delivered now based on what's required. And obviously, you want to take advantage of AI in the cloud as well as really the power is in terms of applying it across the operational life cycle. What do you want to kind of share on these elements there?
Well, one of the most interesting aspects, and some people might think it's boring, but it's really kind of the foundation of how Nile is so successful at creating what we call this closed loop automation system. And that starts with a standardized architecture. So what we do is regardless of the size of the deployment, every single customer network is built, deployed, and activated identically across the board. The only thing that's different is the policies that the customer creates, and policies such as how many SSIDs you have, and what are they named, and what type of security they have, any sort of onboarding and offboarding procedures for devices. Those are the types of things that we allow from a policy standpoint. But when you dig down and you drill down into how the network's routed, how the security is handled, everything's identical from one network to the next. And why that's important is because when we put on our built-in artificial intelligence and our automation, we have good, clean telemetry data to work with because every single customer's network is the same. If there's a problem that's been identified in one customer network, that problem will likely be replicated across all customer networks. And so our artificial intelligence will then go through a process of identifying what that problem is. It will use the Nile digital twin to validate the proposed change that artificial intelligence is proposing, and then once that change is validated, then we use softbots to automatically push that update, right? And so then once that process is done, it starts that whole process all over again. And that's what we call that closed loop automation.
Right. So I think this is really where the power of the architecture comes about, because to the element that we alluded to in regards to complexity, how do you kind of take and build a fabric foundation that is natively zero trust, so security isn't bolted on, and at the same time a lot of the complexities in terms of the configuration aspects of it, touching different things from an operation perspective. So can you eliminate a lot of these things and really make it zero config, zero touch, and have the human and IT resource focus more on the strategic nature of the transformation that needs to be driven rather than the mundane? I think that goes a long way in terms of how do you streamline the operations, but at the same time cut down on the cost aspects as well, because that's kind of where the bodies are buried when it comes to the cost and complexity.
Yeah, I mean,
So,
Shasha, you had mentioned for every $1 of capital spent, capex spent, $3 goes into operations, and that's really that hidden cost, right? So from a university standpoint, you really want to target that operational challenge, and how to do that is to identify problems within your network. How many trouble tickets are is a specific problem getting? Um, those are the types of things, and then once you pinpoint that, then that's when you start to make that transition from your legacy network to Nile, and hopefully see the benefits and the results of that.
very good. So when you start to then look at how do you bring these things together, what do we mean by a next generation NaaS? In the context of Nile, I think we sort of refer to it as a secure enterprise NaaS. Security, as I mentioned, is not something that should be used differently from connectivity. So, in this day and age, if you're talking about networking, it should be secure networking by default. If it's talking about connectivity, it should be secure connectivity by default. And so that is the foundational element baked into the zero trust fabric, where you have the Nile Services Edge portfolio, whether it's the APs, the switches, sensors, the gateways. They're all brought together with a unified management construct, unified policy engine. So it is one fabric that you're helping to manage and orchestrate. And then you have elements of the services cloud, which is really where a lot of the intelligence resides, with the ability to invoke different services from the Nile service catalog. And Andrew, maybe you can touch on some of these different types of services. But he talked about this notion of automation, which we can take advantage with AI, and the AI agents that are in the services cloud as well are able to take advantage of different use cases and work in an autonomous way, which by the way is also supplemented with an AI ops command center, which really has a span of view across day zero, day one, and day two, and brings that standardization that we talked about, with the ability for customers and in many cases partners to have oversight of the policy definition, have visibility and the control associated with it, while opening up areas for third party integration. So while this is a generic architecture that we use, which isn't necessarily for higher ed institutions only, it's really broadly applicable to a variety of different institutions. I think the higher educational teams can certainly take advantage from it, because on one hand, The zero trust fabric brings in a lot of foundational principles that you typically see in data center environments into the local area, campus deployments. So we call it bringing data center class security, whether it's microsegmentation, whether it's being able to limit the blast radius, whether it's consolidating NAC, things like that. The second aspect is really this notion of the service cloud, where you have a different service catalog, which is modular. You can invoke it based on what is required. And again, it continues to help unify, simplify, and automate. And the third is really taking taking ownership of the entire operational life cycle. And the service catalog and the services cloud really allow you to manage change, add new things in a SaaS like manner. So it gives you that SaaS like agility, and the operational purview cuts down on the cost and the complexity and really results in savings. So we think, the university is going through this perfect storm today of having to deal with a lot of high expectations in terms of productivity and experience, but at the same time managing budget and resource. This is something that will allow them to address the here and now, and also future proof, because you can never build an architecture that's completely future proof unless you have it getting delivered to you as a service, and that service is taking ownership of a lot of the upgrades in a plug and play manner. um, Andrew, do you want to briefly touch upon the services catalog here
Sure, absolutely. So
and the
starting on
portfolio as well? Yeah.
Yeah, starting on the left-hand side, we obviously have the Nile access service. So that's where you get your wired and wireless connectivity, which includes wireless access points, it includes switches, it includes specialized wireless sensors, etc. Then we have what we call add-on services, and this is great because if you want to get rid of a lot of your external third-party servers and move towards the cloud, we've got a cloud radius service, a cloud DHCP service, so we can take those networking services, move them into the Nile cloud, and you really never have to worry about managing them again as we do it for you. We also have guest access, and that's especially useful for university settings, as you've got students, dormitories, and guests coming in and out of university campuses all the time. So that provides a secure cloud guest pop gateway, which completely isolates, um, you know, on network traffic versus guest traffic. It totally splits it off. Then we have trust service, which is our security built-in security functionality. There is an add-on service which gives you access to macro and micro segmentation. And then very soon we're going to have a WAN service, which we'll be introducing, which allows a lot of smaller corporate offices and branch offices to really eliminate the need for an on-premise firewall and be able to connect to cloud-based services such as SSE.
Do you also want to touch briefly on the performance of the fabric itself?
Yeah, so from the network fabric itself, I mean everything is enterprise grade hardware. It's dual power supplies, up to 100 gigabit uplinks. So everything that you would expect in the enterprise grade hardware, with the addition of the built-in zero trust security. Now, from a security standpoint, what makes Nile a little bit unique is we don't offer VLANs at all. We don't have the ability to create VLANs, nothing like that. Everything is done at layer three, which means that you no longer have to be concerned about malware proliferating on your network. Every single device is a blast radius of one, meaning if you have two devices on a network, device A can never talk to device B unless it's explicitly allowed through the firewall.
So with that, let's shift to some of the benefits. Andrew, you want to take it from here?
Sure. Yeah. From a higher ed perspective, what really sticks out to us when we talk to our higher ed customers is their ability to reduce tickets. Again, I've worked in university settings in the past, and we were bombarded constantly with uh, trouble tickets that were coming into the help desk that we would have to field as network engineers, revolving around largely Wi-Fi connectivity, Wi-Fi issues. Now, to be able to reduce that by 95%, I mean, if you're talking about trying to get to a lean IT model, that's the way to go. Number two is security. So IoT and OT isolation by design. So I already talked about how every single device on the Nile network is completely isolated from the other. Now, how this is interesting to IoT and OT devices specifically is our built-in zero trust solution doesn't require you to install software agents onto your endpoints. And this is especially important for IoT and OT devices because, as many of you know, you're not able to install agents onto those devices. And so, what happens in legacy networks is that you lose visibility over those devices. With Nile, you totally have that visibility back, which improves your security posture. Now, from an IT focus standpoint, since everything is standardized, since it's managed through artificial intelligence and automation and all that closed loop capability, which eliminates a lot of these mundane tasks from an optimization, a troubleshooting to resolution standpoint. Change management happens a lot faster, right? Number one, your IT team has a lot more time on their hands because they're not having to do these mundane troubleshooting tasks and look at trouble tickets. So from a scalability standpoint, since the network is standardized, you can upgrade and scale up and scale down as needed. You can deploy this to branch offices, branch locations within your university setting in order to, and everything's going to look and feel identical to the original deployment. And finally, we have that 50% operational savings. And again, when we're talking about operations, this is basically day two to day N. So all your management, your maintenance, software updates are handled automatically. So you no longer have to have your IT team wake up at 2 in the morning to push firmware updates or security patches to your switches or APs. All of that is handled for you. So now we're looking at kind of just a list of a handful of our university and higher education customers. We're actually going to drill into three different use cases for you. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay. So this is Concordia University St. Paul, and they're kind of an interesting use case because over the last decade, Concordia University actually had their enrollment size double. So they went from 3,000 to 6,000 enrolled students. However, their IT team remained exactly the same from when they had 3,000 students in enrollment. So they're operating on a highly lean IT model. And what they ended up seeing over time was that their help desk was simply overloaded with too many trouble tickets. In addition to that, they really had low visibility into the connected devices. Again, we're talking about these types of IoT devices, but we're also talking about student use devices as well. Students come on campus into dormitories, they bring their Xboxes or PlayStation. A lot of times, you don't have that type of visibility into those devices. So that's why they came to Nile. And once the Nile network was deployed, um, Concordia University IT staff found 67% fewer outages with the Nile standardized architecture, and that was on day one. So 67%. Think about how much time you're going to be saving without having to troubleshoot and to keep the network running and optimized as it should. And number two, the zero trust isolation blocked breaches from day one. So again, we go to that blast radius of one, where if one device on the Concordia network gets compromised in a traditional network, that infected device would be able to go out and explore other devices within that same VLAN and potentially infect them. And that's how you get that malware proliferation. But with the Nile network, since everything is isolated via layer three, there's no longer that problem. Okay, moving on. University of Missouri, Kansas City. So this was an interesting aspect where the IT staff really wanted to see what Nile could do. And so what we asked them to do was pick their biggest pain point building and let us tackle that. And so that's precisely what happened. So they had underperforming Wi-Fi in an older building. And for those of you that are wireless engineers out there, older buildings, they commonly have plastered walls with wired mesh within them, which is a real headache when it comes to trying to push Wi-Fi signal throughout a building. In addition to that, not uncommon for university settings, they had plenty of Wi-Fi and phishing risks. So when Nile came in and we deployed our network at this troubled building, um, we not only solved their Wi-Fi problems and gave them, fantastic wireless coverage from end to end. It's important to also note that we also did that with a performance guarantee tied to it, and we're the only ones in the industry to provide a 99.95% performance guarantee. In addition to that, from a security standpoint, the campus zero trust fabric isolated and inspects the traffic. So every single device is, again, completely isolated. You can't move from one device to another without explicitly permitting that access. And then our third and most recent higher education use case at this point is the University of Idaho. The University of Idaho is an R1 research facility, and they actually had um, a robotics lab that the current network wasn't really keeping pace in terms of performance and low latency needs. So they were trying to do some advanced robotics and communication between the devices. The latency was simply too high. In addition to that, they were looking for a network that could not only be deployed within this university laboratory, but also be, the network design and standardization could be moved across the entire campus and to some certain branch locations as well. So the Nile difference in this case was we gave them that standardized model. That's all we work with, right? So we give them that model, we give it with a service level guarantee backed by performance. So if we miss our 99.95% guarantee, we're financially backing that, similar to how AWS and Google have their own SLAs. And in addition to that, we have the built-in zero trust with microsegmentation. So in this case, the microsegmentation was important because the robotics lab, the devices needed to communicate locally. So we use the microsegmentation to open that up so the devices could communicate locally without having to hairpin traffic through that external firewall. So for those of you that are interested in taking a look at Nile, we offer a couple of first steps, that we would like you to perhaps consider. The first one, much like the University of Missouri, Kansas City, go ahead and assess your current campus pain points. Take a look at where the Wi-Fi complaints are coming from. Take a look at where potential security gaps exist. Look at your IT help desk and see, like, the ticket volume. Where are the problems coming? Is it isolated to a certain building or not? Those are the types of places that we feel we do the best, and we can prove how much better our network architecture is than competing vendors. The second part of this would be to pilot the NaaS environment in this identified area. So we can demonstrate measurable improvements. Take a look at, are your help desk tickets dropping significantly? Are there fewer Wi-Fi complaints? Do you feel more comfortable knowing that you're not going to have a malware outbreak in this specific building that's going to propagate throughout the rest of the campus network? And finally, we'd like you to evaluate our operational life cycle. So again, we use artificial intelligence and automation not only on day 2, but we start at day -1 with it. From the time that your network is designed to when it's deployed and activated to the time you start using it, all the way until the hardware needs to be refreshed at the end of the life cycle. We're there with you that entire way, and we invite you to evaluate that entire life cycle. So I'm going to just flash these up real quick. This is part of an infographic that we have, and at the last slide you'll be able to click a link to download that. But it's just talking about some of the benefits that we offer higher education institutions, including the guaranteed reliability with our performance guarantee. We enable digital learning. We help with data privacy and safety. All of that stuff is included in the Nile Access service. And one of the quotes on this one I like to kind of point out is that very last one on the bottom right hand side, where it says, during our freshman move in, we received zero network trouble tickets during freshman move in. And so that is key. And I know, working at universities in the past, that freshman move in, when the kids are moving into the dorms, that's when you have the most complaints and the most problems. So to see one of our customers say that, and saying that's never happened before, that shows you what we can do with at Nile.
Well, thank you, Andrew. And before we get to the questions, let's kind of give a pointer to a few of the assets that our viewers could download. One is really about reshaping these higher ed campus networks. How do you think about it in a prescriptive way? You can download that asset off our website. And Andrew just referenced an infographic which talks about the different innovations, and maybe there are some or all of them that are pertinent to you. And that's something you can download as well. And for those of you who are visiting Educast, come by and meet with us. We're going to be there for the entirety of the show, and we will be on booth 1561. So would love for you to come and engage with us. And if we miss out on each other there, then we'll always have somebody available to engage with you offline, right? So with that, I want to go into a couple of questions that have come in, which talk about the um, the engagement. So the first one, let me read it off. If you want to go with Nile, is it an all or nothing replacement, or could we upgrade over time? I think this is a common question that comes up mostly because every educational institution has some form of connectivity already in place, but they want to transform it. So, Andrew, you want to help answer that?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at what UMKC did as an example, they took an entire building. They didn't do their whole campus; they just did one building to see what Nile could do. So, in that sense, Nile can be introduced incrementally, right? So, start with a building, or if the building's large enough, start with just a floor of the building. So absolutely, you can deploy it that way. We do tend to recommend that you do the wired and wireless replacement, simply because that's how the Nile service works. But from an all or nothing approach, yeah, you can take an incremental approach to deployments.
I think the second one is sort of a build out of that in a way.
Okay.
It's talking about how does your performance guarantee work? Is it across all of the different buildings, or is there a certain subset for your as a service model and the performance guarantee?
Yeah. So if you have, let's say, for example, if your university has one campus where Nile is deployed, and then you have three other branch locations, each one of those deployments has its own performance guarantee. So they're not connected together in any sense of the word. So if you have a performance issue that affects a branch office, that branch office would be eligible for that financial guarantee. So they are independent. However, they're all managed within a single unified dashboard.
You talked about increasing number of OT devices and IoT devices across campus. How does Nile's approach keep these from becoming a security risk? So I think this is going back to something we talked about earlier.
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned this before, but we have that device isolation for IoT. So when you deploy IoT sensors or OT sensors onto a traditional network, those are typically placed onto a VLAN with a bunch of other devices. Now, if one of those IoT devices or OT devices gets compromised, that's when that malware can spread across the network. With Nile's network, it's totally different. We isolate everything at layer three. So regardless of, you know, if a device is on the same IP subnet on the Nile network, it's still totally isolated from layer three and must be explicitly permitted in order to have that traffic route from one device to the next.
You mentioned standardized architecture. Doesn't everybody have a standardized architecture? What does Nile mean by ensuring a standardized architecture on every deployment?
Yeah, I mean, I just go back and think about my times when I was a network engineer and an architect. Every single building, every single deployment, regardless of what if it was the same vendor equipment, there was always little nuances, little intricacies where you had to make different configuration changes per building, per campus, what have you. And over time, what happens is you get configuration drift, right? And so a lot of people that are still on traditional networks today are using, automation and some, layered on artificial intelligence to help with that. But at the same time, it goes back to that whole, spring cleaning conversation that I had, where this clutter builds up over time. These different configurations on different equipment within different buildings, that adds up. And so what happens then is your artificial intelligence, it gets confused. It doesn't know up from down many times in situations. So when it provides insights, that might be valid for one specific device because it's configured a very specific way. But if you try to apply that to another device or another network on a branch facility, the results might be totally different. So that's why having that standardized design is so important.
Right. Andrew, I think the last one I see here is, does Nile have an open API for integration with other platforms?
Yeah, absolutely. So we integrate with, ITSM, SIM, ServiceNow, all the help desk ticketing. We integrate with all those tools. We have an open API system um, that's easy to integrate and manage. Add on third party tools too.
Okay. Um, so keep the questions coming. And from what I can glean from the conversations and the questions, and our own ability to go deep into it, we might be coming back with a deeper dive into the security aspects of the fabric. And there's a lot that we see in regards to the IoT, OT security threats. Certainly, it seems to be a huge source of origination of threats in the campus environment today. So we might come back to you with something that's more in-depth treatment of the topic. Then we'll also perhaps need to go a bit deeper into the standardized architecture because, as I was mentioning, if you apply AI onto simplicity, it has a greater multiplicative power compared to applying AI on complexity. So the standardization in terms of both the fabric architecture as well as the operational model is a huge deal in terms of your ability to extract value from AI being applied to it. So we'll keep this conversation going. I just want to quickly summarize. If you're a higher educational institution, you're dealing with a lot of changes, you're resource constrained, you're budget constrained, but yet your mandate is to drive transformation and give that experience for both your employees as well as your students, then it's certainly worth your while to take a look under this notion of network as a service. And if security is top of mind, Nile's solution becomes even more pertinent with the whole construct around secure enterprise NaaS. So we'll have different people come and share things with you from time to time. But for now, I'd like to thank Andrew for his presence in this particular webinar, and to all of you for making the time to go through this and invest some time learning about this particular topic. Thank you all and have a great day. Bye now.